I heard my daughter-in-law say she's too old to know how much money she has. My son agreed. I played dumb, then I showed them what 30 years as a lawyer taught me. I was standing at the top of my stairs when I heard Caroline whisper to my son David, "She's too old to know how much money she has anyway," and my heart stopped when David replied, "You're probably right." I gripped the banister and made a decision that would change everything. I was going to let them think they were smarter than me. What happened next proved that decades in law had taught me more than just how to read contracts. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from, because you're about to see how a supposedly confused old woman systematically destroyed the people who tried to steal her life. I quietly made my way back to my bedroom and sat on the edge of my bed, processing what I'd just heard. It was Tuesday, September 12th. I remember the date because it was the day my life split into before and after. Caroline and David were downstairs in my kitchen, discussing my mental capacity like I was already in a grave. What stung most wasn't just the betrayal, it was that David sounded genuinely convinced. Caroline had been working on him, I realized, planting seeds, creating doubt about my competency. 20 minutes later, I shuffled downstairs in my slippers, playing the part of the confused elderly woman they apparently thought I was. "Oh, there you are, Mom," David said, his voice artificially bright. "We were just talking about maybe scheduling you a routine checkup. It's been a while since you've seen a doctor." I'd seen Dr. Patterson just 3 months ago and received a clean bill of health, but I smiled and nodded like this was news to me. "That sounds wonderful," I said, settling into my favorite kitchen chair. "You know how I worry about staying healthy at my age." Caroline exchanged a meaningful glance with David. "We just want to make sure you're taking proper care of yourself." That evening, I found David's laptop in his office. The password was his birthday, predictable as always. His browser history told a story that made my blood run cold. Searches for elderly cognitive decline symptoms, memory loss early signs, and most revealing, Connecticut conservatorship procedures. But the real smoking gun was an email thread between David and Caroline from 3 weeks ago. Caroline had been systematically feeding him incidents, claims that I'd forgotten conversations, made odd financial decisions, seemed confused about simple tasks. All lies, but presented so convincingly that David had started believing I was declining. She'd been manipulating my own son against me, making him genuinely believe he was protecting me. The cruelty was breathtaking. I spent the next 2 hours printing documents and starting a file that would make my old colleagues proud. If they wanted to play legal games with someone who'd spent decades in courtrooms, they were about to learn why that was a terrible mistake. By Thursday morning, Caroline had launched Phase 2 of her operation. She'd helped me by calling my bridge club to cancel my Thursday game because it was too exhausting for someone with my condition. Then she dismissed Rosa, my housekeeper of 12 years, claiming she'd caught her taking small items. Rosa called me that afternoon crying. "Mrs. Thompson, I would never steal from you. Please, you know I wouldn't do such a thing." "Of course you wouldn't, Rosa," I said quietly. "And I'm going to remember exactly who suggested otherwise." Rosa paused. "Mrs. Thompson, are you all right? You sound different." "I'm more all right than some people think." "Rosa, I need to ask you a favor. Have you noticed anything unusual about Caroline's behavior lately? Anything at all?" "Well," Rosa hesitated. "She's been going through your papers when you're napping, taking pictures with her phone. I thought it was strange, but Mrs. Caroline said she was organizing things for you." Perfect. Caroline had made her first real mistake. There was a witness to her snooping. Friday evening brought Caroline's masterpiece suggestion over dinner. "Dr. Patterson is so old-fashioned," she said, cutting her chicken with practiced precision. "Dr. Wells specializes in geriatric cognitive issues, very modern approaches." "I think that sounds wise," I replied, taking a careful sip of my wine. "After all, at my age, I should probably have someone who understands these things better." David shifted uncomfortably. At least he still had enough conscience to feel guilty. That night, I researched Dr. Harrison Wells thoroughly. His disciplinary record made for fascinating reading. License suspended for 18 months after falsifying dementia diagnoses in 3 separate cases involving family financial disputes. Each case followed the same pattern. Wealthy, elderly patient, concerned family members, rapid diagnosis, immediate conservatorship recommendations. But here's what Caroline didn't know. Dr. Wells had been desperate for money since his reinstatement. His practice was struggling, and he had significant debt from legal fees. Caroline had chosen a corrupt doctor, but also a greedy one who would demand substantial payment. Saturday morning, Caroline announced she'd already made an appointment with Dr. Wells for the following Tuesday. Just a routine evaluation, she assured me with her practiced smile. Nothing stressful. I spent the weekend documenting Caroline's behavior more carefully. She went through my mail before I saw it, redirected phone calls from my financial advisor, and I actually caught her photographing documents from my desk when she thought I was napping in my chair. Instead of confronting her, I lay perfectly still with my eyes closed, letting her think she was getting away with it. Sometimes the best legal strategy is letting your opponent think they're winning. Dr. Wells's office on Tuesday afternoon looked like a medical practice designed by someone trying too hard to appear legitimate. Everything was suspiciously pristine, like a movie set built to inspire confidence in fraudulent healthcare. "Mrs. Thompson, how are we feeling today?" Dr. Wells asked. I noticed Caroline had positioned herself where she could maintain eye contact with him throughout our conversation. "Oh, you know how it is," I said, settling into the chair across from his desk. "Some days are clearer than others. Yesterday I spent 15 minutes looking for my reading glasses." I gestured to the glasses hanging around my neck. "Silly me," Caroline nodded with rehearsed sympathy. "She's been having more episodes like that lately." Episodes, as if normal human moments of distraction were symptoms of neurological disease. Dr. Wells began his evaluation with questions clearly designed to make me appear confused rather than actually assess my cognitive state. When did I last balance my checkbook? Had I ever left appliances running? Did I sometimes forget familiar faces? But I noticed something interesting. Dr. Wells kept glancing at a notepad where Caroline had written specific points. She'd literally given him a script for this fake evaluation. "I'd like to run some cognitive assessments," he announced, producing a tablet. "Standard tests to establish a baseline for your care." The tests were elementary. Remember 3 words: draw a clock face, identify pictures of common objects. But here's where Wells revealed his corruption. Whenever I answered correctly, he'd interrupt before I could complete my response, claim I'd made errors I hadn't made, or rush through explanations so quickly that Caroline couldn't observe my actual performance. Decades of cross-examining witnesses had taught me to recognize coaching and manipulation when I saw it. "How do you think she performed?" Caroline asked as we prepared to leave. "I'll have the comprehensive assessment ready by Friday," Wells replied smoothly. "But I do have some preliminary concerns about cognitive decline that we'll need to address systematically." As we walked to Caroline's car, she slipped her arm through mine with false tenderness. "Don't worry, Margaret," she said softly. "Whatever Dr. Wells finds, David and I will make sure you're properly cared for." But as we drove home, I noticed Caroline's hands shaking slightly on the steering wheel. Whatever her plan was, she was under enormous pressure to make it work quickly. The medical report arrived the following Friday, delivered with all the solemnity of a terminal diagnosis. Caroline read it aloud at dinner like she was sharing tragic news, though I caught the flash of relief she couldn't quite suppress. "Moderate cognitive impairment with signs of progressive dementia and poor financial judgment," she announced with practiced sorrow. David pushed his food around his plate without looking up. "What exactly does that mean for Mom's day-to-day life?" "It means," Caroline said carefully, "that we need to start thinking seriously about Mom's care going forward. Her financial planning, legal decisions. She's going to need assistance with complex matters that could become confusing for her." There it was. The real purpose behind this elaborate medical theater. I excused myself early that evening, claiming fatigue. But instead of going to bed, I sat in my reading chair with the lights off, waiting. Within an hour, their voices drifted up from the kitchen below. My hearing had always been excellent, another thing they'd seriously underestimated. "The attorney said that with the medical diagnosis, we can start the conservatorship process," Caroline was saying. "It typically takes 3 to 4 months, but with Dr. Wells' documentation, we have a strong case." "This still feels wrong." David's voice was strained. "Taking control of her finances while she's still living here independently." "David, your mother isn't going to live forever," Caroline's tone sharpened. "When she's gone, do you want to spend years in probate court because she made poor decisions during her decline? Do you want to risk her giving away your inheritance to some charity scam?" My inheritance. How thoughtful of Caroline to be so concerned about David's future financial security. "Besides," Caroline continued, "we're not stealing anything. We're protecting her assets, ensuring they're managed responsibly during her cognitive decline." I heard papers rustling, then Caroline's voice again, lower but urgent. "Look at these numbers, David. Between her retirement accounts, investments, and this house, we're talking about nearly $4 million. Money that could secure Tommy and Lisa's college funds, pay off our mortgage, give us real financial security. Our financial security." Not mine, apparently. What if she fights the conservatorship? David asked weakly. Caroline's laugh was sharp. With what mental capacity? Dr. Wells's report clearly documents that she lacks the cognitive ability to make major financial decisions. No judge is going to side with a woman who can't remember where she put her glasses. Those glasses, still hanging around my neck where they'd been all along. I made my way back to my bedroom, but sleep was impossible. Instead, I opened my laptop and began doing what I did best, building an airtight legal case. If they wanted to play in the courts, they'd just challenge someone who'd spent decades winning there. The following Monday morning, I launched into my new performance as a confused elderly woman. I shuffled around the kitchen in my bathrobe, forgot to turn off the coffee maker, and asked Caroline twice what day it was. Every befuddled moment was carefully calculated, every mistake deliberately performed. Meanwhile, I was conducting my own systematic investigation. A thorough review of my bank statements revealed some fascinating discoveries. $12,000 had been withdrawn for home health consultations I'd never received. $8,000 had disappeared for medical equipment that never materialized. When I called the bank directly, they explained that David had been added as an authorized user 4 months ago, using a limited power of attorney document that I now realized Caroline had slipped into a stack of insurance papers I'd signed. But the real breakthrough came when Caroline made a critical error. She left her laptop open on the kitchen counter while she went grocery shopping, probably feeling confident that I was too confused to use technology effectively. Her email history revealed the full scope of her desperation. Credit card balances totaling over $60,000, a second mortgage on their house that David clearly didn't know about, and increasingly threatening communications from creditors. But the most chilling discovery was a series of emails with Dr. Wells discussing payment. She'd promised him $15,000 for the fraudulent diagnosis, money she didn't have but planned to get from my accounts once the conservatorship went through. Timeline critical, Caroline had written just yesterday. Creditors threatening legal action within 30 days. Need expedited process. 30 days. She was facing financial ruin and saw my assets as her only escape route. I quickly photographed the most damning emails, then closed the laptop just as I heard Caroline's car in the driveway. But as I tried to hurry back to my chair, I knocked over a glass of water on the counter. Caroline walked in just as I was cleaning it up with paper towels. "Oh, Mom, let me help you with that," she said, but her eyes were darting between me and her laptop. "Have you been in the kitchen long?" "I just came down for some water," I said, playing confused. I think I bumped the glass somehow. Her eyes narrowed slightly. For the first time, I saw a flicker of suspicion. Caroline was starting to wonder if I was as confused as I appeared. "Why don't you go rest in your chair?" she suggested, but it sounded more like an order. That evening, Caroline prepared my favorite meal, pot roast with vegetables. She served it with an especially warm smile and watched me more carefully than usual as I moved food around my plate. "You're not eating much tonight," she observed. "I'm just not very hungry," I replied, not taking a single bite. Because if Caroline was getting suspicious, the stakes had just gotten much higher. That evening, I called Robert Chen, my former colleague from Morrison Chen and Associates, where I'd practiced estate and family law for decades. If anyone could help me navigate this legal minefield, it was Robert. "Margaret, what a wonderful surprise." His familiar voice warmed me immediately. "How have you been?" "I've been better, Robert. I need your help with something confidential, something that might genuinely shock you." I told him everything. The fraudulent medical diagnosis, the forged power of attorney, Caroline's mounting debts, her increasingly controlling behavior with my medications. When I finished, Robert was silent for several long moments. "Margaret," he finally said, "you're describing a textbook elder abuse scheme. The medical fraud alone constitutes multiple felonies, but we need to be very careful about how we proceed." "What do you mean?" "Connecticut is a two-party consent state for recordings. That conversation you recorded might not be admissible in court. We need to build a case using evidence that will definitely hold up." "How much time do we have?" "Based on Connecticut conservatorship procedures, probably 3 to 4 months before any court hearing. That gives us time to build a solid defense. But we need to move carefully and methodically." "Robert, there's something else. Caroline seems to be getting suspicious. I think she's wondering if I'm as confused as I appear. Then we need to accelerate our timeline. I'm going to refer you to someone who can help, Marcus Sullivan. He's a private investigator who specializes in financial crimes and domestic fraud. More importantly, he knows how to gather evidence that will hold up in court." After hanging up with Robert, I felt both hope and growing fear. I wasn't just a victim anymore, but if Caroline suspected I was onto her, she might escalate her plans. The next morning, I made a theatrical show of being confused about breakfast. I tried to put orange juice on my cereal, then acted frustrated when Caroline corrected me. But I noticed she was watching me more intently, studying my reactions. "Mom, are you feeling all right today?" she asked. "You seem different." "I feel fine, dear," I said, deliberately fumbling with my coffee cup. "Just tired, I suppose." That afternoon, while Caroline was meeting with her attorney about the conservatorship, I called Marcus Sullivan from my landline. "Mr. Sullivan, Robert Chen referred me. I need help building a legal case against family members who are trying to defraud me." "Mrs. Thompson, I'd be happy to help, but I need to warn you. If your family suspects you're investigating them, you could be in real danger. Can you meet somewhere safe?" We arranged to meet Thursday at a coffee shop in downtown Greenwich, but as I hung up the phone, I heard a floorboard creak upstairs. Caroline was supposed to be out for another hour. I quickly moved to my chair and picked up a magazine, but my heart was pounding. Had she come back early? Had she heard my conversation? Footsteps on the stairs. Caroline appeared with a load of laundry, but her expression was thoughtful, almost calculating. "I thought I heard you talking to someone," she said casually. "Just reading aloud," I replied, holding up the magazine. "Sometimes it helps me concentrate." She nodded, but I could see the wheels turning. Caroline was definitely becoming suspicious, and that made everything much more dangerous. Thursday afternoon, I met Marcus Sullivan at a coffee shop in downtown Greenwich. He was younger than I'd expected, but asked the right questions with professional precision and genuine concern. "Mrs. Thompson, based on the documentation you've shown me, we're looking at clear financial fraud and elder abuse. The medical conspiracy adds several additional felonies to the potential charges. What's our next step? We gather more evidence systematically, but we do it carefully. I'll conduct background checks on everyone involved and document the financial irregularities. Meanwhile, you need to be extremely careful about your personal safety. Caroline's getting suspicious. I think she's starting to question whether I'm as confused as I appear." Marcus leaned forward, his expression serious. "That's what I was afraid of. When people are facing financial ruin and see elderly family members as their only solution, they sometimes escalate beyond fraud. We need to move quickly but carefully." "What do you mean by escalate?" "I mean your medication, your food, accidents that might not be accidents. Don't eat or drink anything Caroline prepares without witnesses present. Document everything with photos when possible, and consider asking someone to stay with you." That weekend, my grandson Tommy came to visit, looking more uncomfortable than usual. We sat in my kitchen, and I decided to take a calculated risk. "Tommy," I said gently, "I need to ask you something important. Has your mother said anything specific about my mental health?" He looked up, surprised by my directness. "She says you have memory problems and that you're getting confused about money stuff. But what do you think, based on your own observations?" Tommy was quiet for a long moment. "Honestly, you seem completely normal to me. You remember everything, my classes, my friends' names, even that I had a chemistry test last week. You asked me detailed questions about it." "Tommy, I need you to know something important. Your mother isn't your biological mother. You and Lisa were adopted by David after your real mother died when you were very young. Caroline lied about being your mother to make her marriage to David seem more legitimate." His eyes widened in shock. "What? But she always said—" "I know what she said, but I have the adoption papers. I need you to remember this conversation, and if anything happens to me, if I suddenly get much worse, or if I have an accident, I need you to tell the police what I just told you." "Grandma, are you in danger?" "I'm working to make sure I'm not, but I need allies who know the truth." That evening, Caroline prepared dinner with unusual attention to detail. She kept asking if I wanted seconds, if the food tasted right, if I felt okay after eating. "You seem tired lately," she observed. "Maybe you should take your blood pressure medication earlier in the evening." "That's a good idea," I agreed, accepting the pills she handed me. But instead of swallowing them, I used the sleight of hand technique I'd perfected over the past weeks. Later, I examined the pills under my reading lamp. They weren't my usual blood pressure medication. They were something else entirely, something that would make an elderly woman very sleepy, very confused, and potentially very sick. Caroline wasn't just trying to steal my money anymore. She was actively trying to make me appear sicker than I was. And if that didn't work, she might be trying to make me genuinely sick. The game had just become deadly serious. The following Tuesday, Marcus called with information that confirmed my worst fears. "Margaret, Caroline's financial situation is even more desperate than we initially thought. She's not just behind on credit cards, she's facing foreclosure on a second mortgage David doesn't know about. She owes over $80,000 to various creditors, and several are threatening to garnish David's business accounts. How long does she have before complete financial collapse? Based on the documentation I've obtained, maybe 3 weeks. She's been robbing Peter to pay Paul for months, but she's running out of Peters. Everything suddenly made sense. Caroline's desperation, the accelerated timeline, the increasing risks she was taking. She wasn't just greedy, she was facing financial ruin in a matter of days. There's more, Marcus continued. I found evidence that Caroline has been researching other elderly individuals in the area. This appears to be her specialty. She's done this before, just on a smaller scale. You mean I wasn't her first victim? Based on what we've discovered, you're her most ambitious target, but not her first. She appears to have successfully manipulated smaller amounts from at least 2 other families using similar techniques before she married David. That afternoon, I made a decision that would either save my life or expose me to even greater danger. I was going to force Caroline's hand by appearing to give her exactly what she wanted. Caroline, I said over dinner, I've been thinking about what Dr. Wells discussed. Maybe you and David are right about needing help with my financial affairs. Caroline's fork stopped halfway to her mouth. What exactly do you mean? I mean, maybe it's time to admit I can't handle these complex matters anymore. If you think conservatorship is the right choice, I won't fight the process. The look that passed between Caroline and David was electric. Caroline's eyes lit up with barely contained excitement, while David seemed relieved that I was accepting the situation without conflict. Are you certain about this? Mom? David asked. It's a significant decision. I'm certain, I said, with a deliberately sad smile. I just want what's best for our family. What I didn't tell them was that Robert Chen and I had been exceptionally busy. We'd obtained an independent psychiatric evaluation from Dr. Elizabeth Harrison at Yale Medical Center, which confirmed my complete mental competency. We'd documented every fraudulent transaction with bank records and timestamps. We'd gathered evidence of Dr. Wells' corrupt practices and Caroline's mounting financial desperation. Most importantly, we developed a plan to expose them that didn't rely on inadmissible recordings. I'd like to have a small family gathering this weekend, I announced. Nothing elaborate, just close family and a few longtime friends. If I'm going to sign these papers, I want to mark this transition appropriately. Caroline practically glowed with anticipation. That sounds perfect, Mom. A meaningful way to celebrate this new chapter in your care. But Caroline had no idea that this gathering would include some very special guests, and that I was about to turn the tables on her in a way she'd never see coming. Saturday evening arrived with perfect autumn weather for what Caroline believed would be my surrender. She'd invited several neighbors and some of David's colleagues, playing the part of the devoted daughter-in-law, organizing a touching farewell to her mother-in-law's independence. What she didn't know was that I'd made some additions to the guest list. Mom, you look wonderful tonight, David said as guests began arriving. He seemed genuinely emotional about what he believed was my graceful acceptance of diminished capacity. Thank you, sweetheart. Tonight feels like the beginning of something important. Caroline moved through the room like a hostess at her own celebration, accepting sympathy and praise for her selfless dedication to caring for me. Several guests commented on how fortunate I was to have such a devoted family. Among the guests were Robert Chen, whom I introduced as my longtime family attorney, and Rosa, my former housekeeper, whom I'd invited to help serve. Caroline's face tightened when she saw Rosa, but she couldn't object without seeming petty. I'd like to say a few words, I announced, once everyone had gathered in the living room. Caroline beamed at me encouragingly. Of course, Mom. This is your special evening. I stood in front of my fireplace, looking out at the faces of family, friends, and neighbors, some genuine, some concerned, and one, Caroline, practically vibrating with anticipation. Thank you all for being here tonight. I asked you to come because I wanted witnesses for something significant. You see, there are people in this room who believe I'm suffering from dementia and can't manage my own affairs. A few murmurs of sympathy rippled through the crowd. Caroline nodded with practiced sadness. The interesting thing is, I continued, reaching into my jacket pocket, I've never felt more mentally sharp in my entire life, and I have some information to share that might genuinely surprise everyone. I pulled out a thick folder and placed it prominently on the mantel. This contains bank records showing unauthorized withdrawals from my accounts, medical records from Dr. Elizabeth Harrison at Yale confirming my complete cognitive competency. Evidence of Dr. Wells' previous disciplinary actions for falsifying elderly patient assessments, and documentation of Caroline's severe financial problems that motivated this entire scheme. The silence in the room was deafening. Caroline's face had drained of all color. "Rosa," I said, turning to my former housekeeper, "would you please tell everyone what you witnessed Caroline doing in my home office?" Rosa stepped forward nervously. "I saw Mrs. Caroline taking pictures of Mrs. Thompson's financial papers with her phone. When I asked about it, she told me she was organizing things, but it didn't seem right." "Thank you, Rosa." I looked directly at Caroline, who seemed frozen in place. "You see, Caroline, you made one critical miscalculation. You assumed that being elderly meant being naive, but decades practicing law taught me to recognize fraud when I see it." Robert stepped forward. "As Mrs. Thompson's attorney, I've already filed a report with the Connecticut Department of Social Services regarding this attempted elder abuse. Dr. Wells is under investigation by the State Medical Board, and the District Attorney's Office has been provided with all relevant evidence." Caroline finally found her voice. "This is ridiculous. You can't prove any of this." "Actually," I said, smiling for the first time in months, "I can prove all of it. You documented your own crimes in your emails, Caroline. Every fraudulent transaction, every lie you told David, every payment you promised Dr. Wells. That's what happens when criminals get careless." David stood up slowly, his face pale with shock and betrayal. "Caroline, is this true? Did you really?" But Caroline was already moving toward the door, realizing that her carefully constructed house of lies had just collapsed around her. The room erupted in shocked conversations, but I felt nothing but satisfaction. Caroline had tried to steal my independence, my dignity, and my life savings. Instead, she'd just learned why you should never underestimate a woman who spent her career fighting for justice. The aftermath of that evening moved with the efficiency that only comes when law enforcement has overwhelming evidence. Within 48 hours, Caroline had been arrested on multiple charges of elder abuse and financial fraud. Dr. Wells was suspended pending investigation, and David was cooperating fully with authorities. David sat in my kitchen the next Monday morning, looking like he'd aged a decade overnight. "I can't believe I fell for her lies," he said quietly. "I genuinely thought you were declining, Mom. She showed me incidents, made me doubt my own observations of your behavior. What exactly convinced you I was becoming confused?" I asked, pouring him coffee with perfectly steady hands. "She claimed you'd had conversations that never happened, said you'd made financial decisions that seemed questionable. She told me you'd become defensive when asked about money, that it was a classic sign of early dementia." David rubbed his face. "She made it seem like we were protecting you from making mistakes that could hurt the family." The manipulation had been sophisticated and systematic. Caroline had exploited David's love for me, turning it into a weapon against both of us. "David," I said gently, "I need you to understand something. In all my years practicing law, I've seen families destroyed by lies and assumptions. The lesson here isn't just about Caroline's crimes. It's about talking directly to the people you love instead of letting others interpret their behavior for you." "I should have come to you directly," he said. "I should have asked you about my concerns instead of listening to Caroline's version of events." That afternoon, Marcus arrived with final updates from his investigation. The scope of Caroline's deception was even broader than we'd suspected. Caroline had been systematically stealing from David's business accounts for over a year, Marcus explained. She'd also forged documents to secure that second mortgage. Most disturbing of all, we found evidence that she'd researched methods for inducing cognitive symptoms in elderly people. "You mean she was actually trying to make me sick? Those pills she was giving you weren't your blood pressure medication. They were a combination of substances that would cause confusion, dizziness, and memory problems. She was literally trying to create the symptoms she claimed you already had." Tommy, who'd been listening from the doorway, came in and sat beside me. "Grandma, I'm so sorry I didn't figure this out sooner. I should have questioned what she was telling me about your condition. Sweetheart, you helped me when it mattered most by trusting your own observations over her lies. That took courage. What's going to happen to Mom now?" The question everyone was afraid to ask. Caroline was facing multiple felony charges that could result in 12 to 15 years in federal prison. Dr. Wells would likely lose his medical license permanently and face significant jail time. "The legal system will handle Caroline appropriately," I said. "Your job is to focus on your education and building a healthy relationship with your father." That evening, Robert called with the final pieces of the puzzle. "Margaret, we found something significant in Caroline's apartment. She maintained detailed files on you going back over 2 years. Financial records, medical information, even notes about your daily routines and social relationships. 2 years? This wasn't opportunistic crime. She planned this systematically almost from the beginning of her marriage to David. She specifically researched your assets and legal vulnerabilities before implementing her scheme. The revelation that Caroline had been plotting against me for years, that she'd manipulated my son as part of a long-term financial fraud, was devastating. But there was one genuinely positive development. Tommy and Lisa are legally David's adopted children," Robert continued. "Caroline's lies about their parentage don't change their legal status. They'll remain part of your family regardless of what happens to her, so they won't lose their grandmother when this is over," I said. "They'll just lose the woman who's been lying to them their entire lives." 14 months later, I stood in a Connecticut federal courtroom watching Caroline receive her sentence. 12 years for elder abuse, financial fraud, conspiracy, and attempted poisoning. Dr. Wells received 6 years and permanent revocation of his medical license. Justice, as it turned out, was even more satisfying than revenge. David and I have been rebuilding our relationship methodically. He's in therapy, learning to process the fact that his entire marriage was built on systematic deception and financial fraud. It's painful work, but he's committed to earning back my trust and his own self-respect. "I should have protected you instead of doubting your competency," he told me last Sunday over dinner. "You should have communicated with me directly instead of accepting someone else's interpretation of my behavior," I replied. "But we all make mistakes. The important thing is learning from them." Tommy is now 18 and in his freshman year at college. He visits me every other weekend, and we've developed the kind of relationship I always hoped to have with my grandchildren. Lisa, now 17, has been living with me while David reorganizes his life. Having young people in the house again has been surprisingly energizing. "Grandma," Lisa said last week while we were preparing dinner together, "I admire how you handled everything. You could have just been a victim, but you chose to fight back intelligently. Sometimes fighting back is the only way to protect yourself and the people you love," I told her. But the most meaningful development in my life came from an unexpected source. 2 months after Caroline's sentencing, I received a phone call from an elderly man named Frank Morrison. "Mrs. Thompson, I saw your story in the Hartford Courant. My daughter and her husband have been trying to convince me I have dementia so they can control my finances. I don't know what to do or who to trust." That phone call led to another, then another. Within 6 months, I was consulting on elder abuse cases throughout Connecticut. 8 months later, I'd helped establish the Connecticut Elder Protection Legal Clinic, providing free legal services to seniors facing financial exploitation by family members. "You've transformed your personal nightmare into a way to help hundreds of people," Robert said when we celebrated the clinic's first anniversary. "That's what good lawyers do," I replied. "We take complex problems and develop systematic solutions." Last month, I testified before a congressional subcommittee about elder abuse, sharing my story and advocating for stronger federal protections. The irony wasn't lost on me. Caroline had tried to convince the world that I was too old and confused to manage my own affairs, and now I was helping to shape national policy. Yesterday, Tommy brought his girlfriend to meet me. As we sat on my porch overlooking the garden Lisa and I planted together, I reflected on how dramatically everything had changed. "Mrs. Thompson," Tommy's girlfriend asked, "how did you stay so strong through such a terrible betrayal?" I thought about her question carefully, watching David arrive for our weekly dinner, seeing the genuine smile on his face as he waved from the driveway. "I stayed strong because I remembered who I was," I said finally. "For a while, I let other people define me by my age, my supposed limitations, my apparent vulnerability. But my legal career taught me that the truth always emerges eventually. You just have to be patient enough and strategic enough to make sure you're the one controlling how it's revealed." Caroline thought my age made me weak. She thought my trust made me gullible. She thought my love for my family made me an easy target. She was wrong about everything. The truth is, getting older doesn't make you less capable. It makes you more experienced. It doesn't make you more vulnerable. It makes you more strategic. And it certainly doesn't make you less dangerous to people who underestimate you. It just makes you better at playing the long game. And sometimes, the long game is exactly what you need to win everything. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.